Welcome again. My name is Jennifer Fearman, and I am a proud member of the class of 2009. Very happy to see some of my own classmates here and all of you. We have a wonderful turnout again this year with over 140 alumni registered for today's program at Barnard, and over 60 of you registered to attend programs at Columbia University's Alumni Leaders Weekend. So we are delighted to have all of you. On behalf of the entire Leadership Assembly Committee, I want to welcome you back to our home on 116th Street. I am delighted and honored to serve as your Leadership Assembly Chair for a second year. I must recognize first the strong, beautiful Barnard, bold Barnard team of Leadership Assembly Committee members. I'd ask that everybody just wave so you can be recognized. And I would also like to extend a tremendous thank you to Kat Trammell and her team and the development team, Brett Silver's team, that have made this possible. So we are here today to once again ask how can we as alumni leaders best serve our alma mater, our community, and the next generation of Barnard women. Today we continue our mission to engage, enlighten, and empower our alumni leadership community. This year, we're looking at that question and that mission through story. Throughout the day, we've started to dive into and will continue to dive into the story of Barnard as an institution with updates on the Bold Standard campaign, faculty, negotiations, and other important campus updates. We will layer on our own Barnard story through the excellent workshop led by Vanessa earlier and by our breakout sessions later. And finally, we will add the story of current Barnard students through the reception that we will have with students later this afternoon, and the faculty lecture. To use Vanessa's language, which very conveniently lined up with my intention for these remarks, this is the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. At the end of today is our hope that you will have a Barnard story connecting institution, alumni, and students to bring back to your class officer groups, regional clubs, and personal Barnard networks, ready to share with your peers and continue the cycle of engage, enlighten, empower. Vanessa said something else that really resonated with me earlier. In the context of fundraising, she shared the idea of philanthropy as values in action. I'd like to bring to you the idea that your volunteer service to Barnard is also values in action. We are all here because Barnard has made a deep, lasting impression on our lives in one way or another. It is a part of us. As volunteer leaders, we have a responsibility to Barnard and our community to help all of our fellow alumni find their Barnard connection and live those values in action. For the first time in Leadership Assembly history, we are also aligning our gathering with Columbia Alumni Leaders Weekend. This allows us to build deeper ties to our classmates and fellow alumni across Broadway while maintaining the distinct Barnard tradition of Leadership Assembly. I'm delighted that so many of you plan to attend tonight's reception at Casa Italiana and tomorrow's sessions on Columbia campus. We are all a small part of this exceptional Barnard family, spanning the globe and tens of thousands of women strong. It is our job to take the work and message of Leadership Assembly and bring that back to the broader community. Thank you for your service to Barnard, and thank you for taking the time to learn with us at Leadership Assembly. So without further ado, one of my favorite parts of Leadership Assembly, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Debora L. Spar, the 7th and current president of Barnard College. In her 9 years as president, Debora has been a vocal proponent of women's education and leadership, both at the college and across the globe. It is always a pleasure for me personally to introduce President Spar, as I attended her inauguration my senior year. I still have my sparkler t-shirt designed to commemorate the occasion. Prior to joining Barnard in July 2008, President Spar spent 17 years on the faculty of, as some call it, a small school in Boston, also known as Harvard Business School. President Spar's teaching spanned politics of international business, competitive capitalism, and economic development. President Spar is an acclaimed political scientist and has focused her research on international political economy and issues of particular importance to women. Very fitting. President Spar is a graduate of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and received her doctorate in government from Harvard. She is a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences and currently serves as a director of Goldman Sachs, a director of Value Retail, and a trustee of the Wallace Foundation. She is also the author of numerous books with more to come. Please join me in warmly welcoming President Debora Spar. And with President Spar today, we have Terry Newman, the president of the AABC, the Alumni Association Board of Barnard College. Terry is a certified executive coach and founder and CEO of Newman Management Consulting. She has extensive experience advising and coaching leaders and teams to achieve higher impact in their roles. Through solutions-focused coaching, assessments, team building, and facilitation, she helps leaders and teams achieve greater effectiveness. She leverages her business and leadership experience in her work as a coach, consultant, and facilitator. Terry has coached professionals from over 25 countries across 6 continents on 360 feedback, individual effectiveness, leadership and team development, career management, change management, and effective communication. In addition, she has coached Columbia Business School and Executive MBA students as part of a social intelligence class and worked as a coach and facilitator for several women's leadership programs. I had the pleasure of being a beneficiary of that coaching she did at the EMBA program at Columbia. It was wonderful. Terry designs and leads customized interactive workshops and retreats to facilitate team effectiveness and leadership development. Her clients include senior executives from ADP, Citigroup, Con Edison, GE, HBO, HSBC, International Finance Corporation, the World Bank, ING, Prudential Investment Management, and PwC. Terry is president of the Alumnae Association of Barnard College and a trustee of the college. In addition, she serves on the Leadership Council for Barnard's Athena Center for Leadership Studies. Terry graduated cum laude from Barnard College with a BA in Cultural Anthropology and earned her certification in Executive and Organization Coaching from Columbia University. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you very much for that gracious introduction of both of us, and it's a pleasure to be back. Okay, how about now? Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here on stage for my final year as president of the Alumni Association and with Debora Spar, and it's been a wonderful journey so far and a terrific morning. And before I ask the questions, I just wanted to share 2 quick comments. One was based on Linda Bell's conversation with us about the contingent faculty negotiation. All of you, I would ask that any of you that are social media aficionados to make sure to share. It's a very nuanced story, a multifaceted story, to share a little bit of insight and perspective if you can to help illuminate the story. In the words of one idea that one of my fellow alums, Francis, suggested, you can even say something like, whatever happened to the rigorous investigation of the facts, or it's a complicated story and Barnard is negotiating in good faith. Because coming from us, it has a different impact than coming from the communications office. So those of you that are comfortable being ambassadors and just sharing that perspective, I think it would be helpful. And then finally, I thought I would just in a moment share my story of why Barnard means so much to me and why I've given my time and my money to the organization. I feel like Barnard is the gift that keeps on giving. I got a fabulous education, but more than that, I did major in being unafraid, and it really helped launch my multiple careers that I've had, from 28 years in the financial services industry to reinventing myself as an executive coach and having the courage to try new things and always feeling supported by this fantastic community. And how I chose to give back was endowing a scholarship in memory of both my grandmothers, who really valued education and valued a woman's place in the world and shared those messages to me, but never had the opportunity even to go to high school, given their financial circumstances. And so that was my way of connecting my values and with something that was near and dear to me, which was enabling that next generation of future women leaders to get the best education regardless of their financial circumstances. So I thought I'd just share that story because it makes me so joyous to go to the scholarship dinner every year and see my 2 grandmothers' names in a brochure with a world-class college. And I wish they were here, but I know somewhere they know that their memory is living on through this legacy and something that's aligned with my values. So thank you for letting me share my story. And now I'm going to ask Debora a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up as well. So last year when we gathered for Leadership Assembly, it was at Barnard Hall, and the gym was under construction, and Lehman Library was still standing. So a lot has happened in one short year. Can you offer us an update on the progress of the construction of the new Teaching and Learning Center?
Well, I certainly can, and just first of all, thank you to Jennifer. Thank you, Terry, as always, for being wonderful and gracious, and it's been a great pleasure working with you. So the easiest way to get a sense of what's happening on campus is to walk on campus. You'll notice a few small changes. You can peer through the little hidey holes in the side of the construction fence and see what's actually happening in the site formerly known as Lehman Hall. If you want to get a better view, go up to the 5th floor of the Diana on this building, and if you go to the sort of the west side or the exterior staircase, you can really look down onto the construction site. I've been personally incredibly lucky. I live right across the street on the 8th floor. So every day when I come home, I look out my window and I can see the progress. And it's been fascinating. I'm married to an architect, so I have pretty good personal experience with construction projects. But watching this one on a daily basis has been phenomenal. The really good news here is the project is on time and on budget, which is a minor miracle. And I don't know, most of you probably don't know the folks who do all the hard work here, but Rob Goldberg, our COO, and Gail Beltrone, our Director of Campus Services, have just been extraordinary in driving this project where it needs to be. So some of you may have been around. There was a wonderful moment in late May, early June, where Lehman Hall came down. And it was like really slow, and you couldn't see much, and then like in a week, the whole thing came down. That was just the process they used. And one of the most fun parts, it was just, you know, you rarely get a chance in life to just watch something that's just tangibly so much, like it's like, you know, big machines and rocks falling, and it was like giant dinosaurs had come onto our campus. And before the demolition, the students, without, I will confess, asking anyone's permission, had decided to graffiti the library as a way of saying goodbye. And so they had taken spray paint and had done all these murals and pictures in the library. And it added to the excitement because as the building came down, like different pictures were revealed. So there was one morning I came out, I'll remember this for a long time, I came out of my door and I looked up at the building and there was a giant Jesus on the cross, which is not usually what you see around here all that much. And then he was gone, and then something else showed up. So it's actually been you know, just fun to watch, but more importantly, we know that this great new project is underway. They're doing the foundations now. The steel will start emerging around Thanksgiving, and probably by the time you're all back this time next year, the exterior of the building will be done. Because this is now the part where it starts to move fast again. And then 2 years from now, we will move in August of 2018. 2 years from now, it opens, and it's just going to be phenomenal. It's going to be what this campus has not had in a long time, which is a cutting-edge, undergraduate, liberal arts library, complete with all of the sort of the new ways of learning. So there will be a digital humanities center, a computational science center, a dance movement laboratory, and crucially, what every modern library needs on an undergraduate campus, a coffee bar. So many of you have heard me make this plea repeatedly, but I will continue to make this plea. The students, as you know, all refer to me as D. Spar. Regardless of what I do about that, I will forever be D. Spar here. And I am infamous for always walking around with a cup of coffee. So for $1 million, anyone in this room can endow the D. Spar coffee bar, which I am very much hoping will be my legacy at the college.
Great. So we recently welcomed the first-year class, the class of 2020, which I understand is 605 students. Tell us a little bit about this new class.
Well, as you can see, I don't have notes, so I won't give you all of the numbers that I probably should, but the numbers are less important than these amazing young women who just showed up. So yeah, 605, we were shooting for 600. We got 5 more than we bargained for, but we managed to squeeze them into the rooms yet again. Most selective class in the college's history. I have now said this every year since I've been here, but every year we get more and more selective. So our admit rate this year was 16%. 16%. That puts us in among the most selective colleges in the world, and not the most selective women's college, the most selective colleges. We also have, and this is a number that people like me worry about a lot, we have one of the highest yields in the country. So the admit rate is what percent of the applicants you take. The yield rate is what percent of the admitted students decide to come. And if any of you have, either have been through this process recently or have kids or, cousins or whoever who've gone through it, kids today are applying to 12, 15, 20 colleges sometimes. So if a kid has applied to 20 colleges and they get into 7, the chance that they're going to come to any particular college is actually quite small. Our yield is over 50%, which is astonishing. It's higher than the only other colleges that tend to be in that range are places like West Point, which is not usually what we think of as a peer school. But in terms of yield, we are up there. And I watch that number like a hawk, because that's the number that really tells you, how badly kids want to be here. And quite frankly, it's why we've had a hard time managing the class size, because we keep saying we can't possibly get our yield any higher, and it keeps going up. So at some point this will plateau out. But the numbers are great. And crucially, again, and those of you who've been here before, many of you, hear me say this every year, we really are focusing as much as we can on diversity, and diversity across all vectors. So what states our students are coming from, what countries they're coming from, what socioeconomic bands they're coming from, what religious backgrounds, and so our class is, again, increasingly diverse. So we are majority minority right now, which I think are the white students, I think is 48 or 49% of the class. Non-white is whatever the flip, 50, 51%. That includes Asian, African American, Latina, and Native American, where we are light. But every other category, we're quite high, we're quite robust, and most importantly, the kids are just phenomenal. I can still call them kids when they're 17 and a half when they arrive. They're just an extraordinary group of young women. And getting to work with them remains the single greatest pleasure of my job. They come in, they're ready to hit the ground running, they're excited, they're happy, they're optimistic, and they are going to make this place better and better and better. And I will tell you just one anecdote from the first year class that somehow captures the moment we're living through right now. So I went to one of the receptions for incoming students during orientation, and I was sitting next to an absolutely lovely, smart young woman. So I'm asking college president questions. So I said, so, what about extracurriculars? What do you want to do here? And she said, oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to play ultimate frisbee and be an activist. She had no idea what she wanted to be an activist around, but she was here to be an activist. And that just kind of captures the spirit of the class of 2020. Oh, I'm sorry, just before I forget, the class of 2020 is a big deal for us, partly just because 2020 is a cool year, and it gives us many opportunities for punning that we intend to fully exploit. But they are really a signature class, because they will graduate with the new library. So by the time they graduate, the library won't be the new library anymore, it will just be the library. They are the first class that will go through the full foundations curriculum. So sorry, they're the first who won't know the 9 ways of knowing. And they're the first class that technically includes trans women. So they are a big deal class for us.
Great, thank you. And your anecdote really segues into the next question. As you referenced in your reunion address in June, from year to year, there tend to be evolving areas of focus for student activism. What are you seeing come to the forefront for this fall?
Yeah, I'm always sort of careful and somewhat trepidated to predict here, because I can never get it right. And the world will toss up different forms of activism, and who knows what's going to happen around the election. So I think there's both a great deal of hopefulness, but also fear around what the election could unleash. So I have no prediction around that. In terms of the active, but something will happen. I mean, the election is going to change things in fundamental ways that I can't predict. In terms of the activism we're already seeing, there's no lack of it. This is a generation, at least at the moment, that, as my anecdote illustrates, wants to be activists. There is a romance around activism that they have fully embraced. And I've spoken to a couple of you in this room. We're hoping to do a project called something like Faces of Activism, which will actually go out to alums who were activists on campus during various phases in the past, and actually have them come in and do a little bit of storytelling and teaching about how activism evolves and how it works, because I think there's a real yearning for that kind of education. But the groups that I'm dealing with most diligently right now are divestment, probably number one. So we have a very active Divest Barnard group. They are, they've been quite successful in getting a lot of our attention and working quite closely with us. So Divest Barnard came to present to the Board of Trustees. It's the only student group in my time here that we've invited to address the board. We then took the next step. We created a task force on divestment, which a couple of you in this room, I think, are on. The task force is composed of trustees, staff, faculty, and students. And they are planning to make recommendations to the Board of Trustees in December, and the board will vote in March. So this is a big deal. And I think it's been fascinating, to be honest,
And
watching.
Do you want to just highlight what they want us to divest from?
Thank you for that. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Depends what day. No, thank you for that. This is divestment from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels. So this is, the central argument being, I think correctly, that our generations have destroyed the planet in some fairly fundamental ways, and that we as an organization should do our bit to pull any of our endowment funds out of certain kinds of energy producing companies. Now, the devil is really in the details there. So does that mean all energy companies? Does it mean bad energy companies? Does it mean consumers of energy versus producers of energy? And crucially, what kind of trade-offs can one imagine? Because our endowment is important. And we don't have a lot of extra dollars floating around that we can afford not to generate returns from. So it's a very complicated set of issues, both financially and scientifically and ethically and politically. So they are working with us to delve into those issues. I don't know where we're going to wind up. They have been very active activists, and we'll see where that happens. I think the core group is pretty small. But it's a cause that has lots of attention around it and interest and commitment to it. A second group that has been quieter thus far this year, but I'm sure will become more active as they sort of get their feet again, is sort of the various spin-offs of Black Lives Matter. So Black Lives Matter was very active on campus after the unfortunate events of sort of November, December last year. They're not an active group on campus at the moment. I suspect that will change. But more importantly, I have been saying at every possible forum that for me, the biggest priority this year on the campus is focusing on not just diversity, but the phrase I keep using, diversity and inclusion. So if you just look at the numbers, sort of what our campus looks like, we're very diverse. As I mentioned earlier, we're more diverse than we've ever been by any vector you can count. We're not as inclusive as I think most of us would like us to be. So there are still students from various subgroups, socioeconomic subgroups, racial subgroups, religious subgroups, who feel occasionally marginalized, who feel attacked, who feel that they are the recipient of phrases, misstatements that they find offensive. So how do we work to make this campus feel more inclusive? And I won't say much more about this now, but feel free to ask questions. These are complicated issues. And the issues of free speech are important here. So how do you sort of thread the needle between making sure people feel comfortable and making sure that you preserve our commitment to free speech? These are hard. Every college campus in the country is dealing with these issues, but I think Barnard should be ambitious and say we can address them as well, if not better, than most of our peers.
Thank you. And then,
and the union. There's a lot of activism around the union.
yes. Do you want to say anything there? Or?
Well, I know you heard a lot from Linda earlier, so I'll just say I think on the union side, we're getting mostly sort of students supporting the union without necessarily being fully aware of what the issues are. So that seems to be more of a sort of sympathetic activism than whereas for the Divest Barnard kids, this is their passion. So there's sort of different flavors of activism there.
Thank you. So the last question before we open it up to all of your questions is, everyone here today just went through a fundraising storytelling training, which was very engaging, and we're all ready to go out and tell the Barnard story. I practiced it in front of all my friends here today. Now that we've entered the public phase of the Bold Standard, can you update us from your perspective?
Yeah, so you've heard or will hear the sheer numbers. So the goal was $400 million, a very audacious goal for a college of our size. When I showed up here in 2008, admittedly it was 2008 because it was financial crisis, but the endowment was $162 million. So for a school that had recently an endowment of $162 million to be doing a $400 million campaign is massive. We've already reached a goal. We have raised $274 million thus far, which is sort of extraordinary, and huge thanks and kudos to all of you who have been involved, as well as Brett Silver and his phenomenal team. This is a big lift, and we are lifting. Sort of chronologically, we had to focus first on the building because we had to make sure we had all the funds for the building before the construction project began. We are now fully funded for the building. We exceeded our expectations, which is extraordinary. We will keep raising money for the building. Remember, $1 million for the D-Spar coffee bar. Because the more we can put into the building, the more we can pay down some of the debt that we had to raise for it. We set out the goal of raising 10 faculty chairs. Faculty chairs are endowed funds that support the salary of an individual professor. So in my previous life, I was the Spangler Family Professor of Political Economy, meant my salary was covered every year from an endowment that the Spangler family had donated. Barnard, when we started this, had 12 endowed chairs, which is really low. We set ourselves a goal of 10, and we have raised, as of most recent time, 22 faculty chairs, which is both extraordinary, but when you think about it, not surprising. Our students' lives are shaped by the faculty here. So when we ask people about philanthropy towards Barnard, it's quite common that people say, I had the most amazing sociology professor. I want to create a fund to honor her work. We've gotten great support for the faculty chairs from parents who really want to support the work that they see their students benefiting from. So the last piece, which is not the last piece, it's just really the one we're focusing on right now, is financial aid, which, again, in some sort of objective sense, should be the easiest, because Barnard has a long commitment and history of supporting students who can't necessarily pay full freight here. I think Barnard has a commitment to socioeconomic diversity. It has a commitment to making sure that the next generation of young women have every opportunity available to them regardless of financial need. So we are setting ourselves a goal of raising $100 million in funds for financial aid. And these are the stories we will be telling loudest and most consistently over the next year and a half. And they're easy stories. Brett and I sometimes joke, all we have to do is have a student show up, right? Because you kind of pick any Barnard student, she's amazing, she's ambitious, and her life was changed by being here. So every single time we can showcase one of these young women who benefited from being here and benefited from financial aid, the story gets told. But we have to keep telling it, we have to put it out there, and I'll just share my own shorter story. Like you, I have not fully endowed a scholarship yet, but my husband and I are in the process of setting up an endowed scholarship, and we have devoted ours to first-generation students. My mother was lucky enough to go to college. My husband, whose parents were immigrants, his mother didn't finish high school and was one of the smartest women I've ever known. And so we want to make sure that we can do what we can to support a particular first-generation student. And I will just say, in the course of discussing with our kids how we should structure this scholarship, we suddenly realized, so I have a nuclear family of 5, my husband and our 3 kids, that of the 5 of us, 2 of us are first-generation students, which my husband was the first in his family to go to college, and our daughter, who we adopted when she was 6, is technically the first to go to college in her biological family, so something that we feel personally very involved with.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story and updating us on the college. And I think at this point, we're going to open it up to questions from all of you.
We have student runners with mics, so if you just raise your hand and the students will come over. Do you want to start right here?
Thank you. Oh, are you sure? Okay. Hello, my name is Sarah Basu, and I'm a proud member of the class of 2016. Might be the youngest person in the room. And a bit of context before I ask my question. For those of you who are not familiar with the class of 2016, we had a lot of activists, and sometimes that activism expressed itself as animosity towards the institution. I feel a little bit differently than a lot of my classmates. That's why I'm here. I love this institution, and it gave me so many things that I didn't even know I wanted at the age of 17 coming here, 18 coming here. And I want to know, especially for women who are coming from classes that might not necessarily feel as connected to the institution. I know Phyllis right here, who I was sitting next to, was talking about coming of age in the era of the protests at Columbia in the 60s. How is the institution, or how can we as alums engage beyond fundraising and making those asks for gifts that, especially right now, some of our peers might not be in a position to give, might not be really wanting to give. Maybe that will change in a few decades, but maybe it won't. How do we engage them through things like what you mentioned, the activist teachings and sharing those stories?
I think the most important thing to do is to just keep people in the loop. Nobody expects folks 4 months out to make major donations. But staying involved, whether it's through Facebook or social media or coming to events, one of the things that I've seen over my time here now is that Barnard students don't identify with some of the things that students elsewhere identify with. There's no football team that we're connected to in any meaningful way. There's no chapel on the hill that people have, fond memories towards. Barnard students connect to Barnard alums. And so anything you can do, and in some ways it's almost more powerful when you're in your younger years, serving as a mentor to current students. I think students frequently, a mentor in their 50s is kind of scary because they can't imagine ever being that old. But a mentor who's 1 year out or 3 years out is hugely powerful. And so just getting involved with career services, we now, both career services and alumni relations report into Brett, which really we think will help to sort of keep these circles more overlapping. So, if you work at, I know we have some young alums who work at McKinsey, who are now coming and helping do the interviews for kids who are, who want to think about McKinsey. We have young alums, a wonderful group of young alums in the tech world, who are serving as, sort of gateways for current students who might want to work in sort of the Silicon Valley alley type roles. So anything you can do to encourage your friends and classmates to just stay involved with the college. People's views also change over time. Last year was a very active, unhappy year across the country. And, and that's why I think the election is going to shade things in huge ways one way or the other. But I think time will hopefully heal a lot of those, not only just heal the issues, but time will not just make people forget the issues, but hopefully will help further the causes that people were activating against, many of which had nothing to do with what was happening on this campus or any other campus. So just keep them involved, keep them in the circle.
And I will also add that even if they can't give a lot of money, if you can get your classmates to give anything on Giving Day, just to get into that habit of giving back. And also, there's a lot that the college and the Alumni Association offers to all alums that is free, including a ton of events on campus. So just organizing your class to come hear a free lecture or come to the film festival. Just coming back on campus, it renews that connection and it builds those ties. And the career development also is a resource that can be used as people navigate their careers. We have some great professional development events that are very inexpensive for younger classes. So there's a lot of services and opportunities to engage with classmates and build that connection.
You can just add on to that for graduates who are not living in New York about area clubs.
So the question
there was
was-
just a comment made that also there's area clubs all around the country and world, and those are wonderful communities with wonderful opportunities to engage with fellow alums and an impressive group of women across a range of careers and interests.
Why don't we go over to the table in the side there and then in the back afterwards?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Burl Hartman. I'm from the class of 1960, and I have a granddaughter who's a senior in high school this year, and Barnard is very high on her list. And so is another school. And she's trying to decide between the two other schools, and she said to me, well, when I did the Barnard tour, I felt that they would emphasize the leadership part of me. She's, that active and so on. But this other school emphasized creativity. And she didn't hear much about creativity here, which kind of shocked me because when I was here, it was like we had the world's greatest writers coming out of Barnard and, great drama and lots of creativity. So I just wondered, I heard a lot about leadership today. I don't think I heard the word creativity at all today. So where do you stand on that?
Firmly in favor of them both. And I think, I don't want to trivialize this, but sometimes there's a huge variation just in sort of who's leading a tour and what kinds of questions get asked on the tour. You might want to tell your granddaughter to think about doing both tours again, because the place is, it's not going to change fundamentally. But if a tour guide, here happens to be an Athena scholar, she'll probably talk more about leadership. Whereas if she is an English major who's not an Athena scholar or somebody who's working at the moment in the architecture studio, you'll just get different personal experiences. But I think one of the things that is going to turn out to be a very powerful visual image of creativity is the new building. So, and this was a big part of the design of the building. When you come back 2 years from now and you walk across campus, you will literally look through walls of glass into maker space and multimedia. Well, the multimedia spaces may be darkened because you can't get too much glass in there, but there's going to be lots of visual reinforcement of our students making things and creating things. You see that in the architecture studio already. So I think we actually do a lot to heighten and underscore the role of creativity here. So I'm just guessing your daughter probably got granddaughter just probably got one glimpse rather than the other. English remains, if it's not our largest major, it's nearly our largest major. And we turn out, and I know we have some of them in the room, incredible writers, incredible architects, incredible dancers. So it's a huge part of what we do here. In the back, yeah.
Hi. So, speaking of the building, This beautiful Diana Center replaced the McIntosh Center, which wasn't yet built when I started, which either makes me feel very old or it was really a young building to come down. So can you remind me, when did Lehman go up? And is there a thought that these wonderful new buildings would last longer than the 35 or so years?
So Lehman went up in 1957. So it's a building that, buildings that were, now I'm speaking a little bit as the wife of an architect, mid-century, sort of mid to late century, 20th century architecture was not built to have the same kind of lifespan, oddly, that late 19th century architecture had. Particularly if you look at buildings from the 60s and 70s, which was sort of that brutalist period, it was not a great period for a lot of architecture. So one of the things and Lehman Library was just a building that had outlived its useful life. The next building that is going to be up for renovation is Altschul. Yeah, and you'll be hearing more about that by next year. Unfortunately, and many campuses look this way. If you look at, I obviously know Harvard, very well. The 19th century buildings at Harvard don't need to be renovated. The 1960s buildings at Harvard are all being pulled down or renovated. It was just not an era that proved to be very long-lived. So of course, in dealing with the architects and selecting materials, you do whatever you can to try to ensure that these buildings will live for as long as they possibly can. But it's interesting. We're going to have to redo Altschul way before we redo Milbank. Yes.
Thank you. I'm sort of like asking a parent which of her children she prefers, and her judicious answer is to say, I have no favorites. So in that spirit, I want to say that I'm with a class of 59, and my leadership group has felt over recent years that our remarkable achievements in science and scientific education are not getting the attention and recognition that they should, particularly because of this still continuing difficulty for women in science and technology. So without asking you to defend anything, I would just like to absolutely beg you to see that there is sort of a more attention paid. We had an experience where I tried to get, we have a very distinguished science graduate in physics who's from the class of 47 or 48, who deserves a tremendous amount of recognition, and we were trying to do that, but we weren't successful. We have established a fund to provide science internships in the summer. So, and I'm not a scientist or a science major, but I was always incredibly proud of the bragging factor about Barnard and science and technology. So English majors, writers, dancers, absolutely. Leaders, yes, but science, please. We still need it. Women still need that extra push.
No, absolutely, and it's a great point. And I'll say sort of on the positive front, we've given a lot of focus in the past 3 years to computer science and technology, and first of all, those are new fields, but we were not doing a great job. Our students in computer science were not getting as good an education as the students in English or religion. And I think we've fixed that, or we're in the early stages of fixing that. We've raised $6 million to hire a new chair in computer science, and then a bunch of postdocs. So we're working hard on that. I think one of the next pieces to come is exactly what you laid out, which is really focusing on science. And I think what we're going to do, and we just had a planning meeting around this at the senior staff, we're going to take probably the next 6 to 18 months, we have to look at Altschul. We have to come up with a plan to renovate that building, because right now we just can't do the kind of science we need to do in that building. And that actually gives us something tangible around which to create an entire strategy thinking about women in science. And that would be both looking backwards and looking forward. So I would strongly suspect if you come back this time next year, or for sure 2 years from now, and Terry asks me the same question, I'll be talking a lot about celebrating science at the college. Yeah, over here.
Thank you. Going back to your first comments, statistics of admission rates and yields. Do you know how we compare to Harvard and Princeton?
Nobody compares well with Harvard and Princeton.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, Harvard has a very high yield, but we are higher than nearly all of the liberal arts colleges. Higher than, I shouldn't mention them, but places in Western Massachusetts known for being excellent liberal arts colleges. Nobody competes with Harvard and Princeton. But yeah, except West Point. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in the back over there.
Thanks. So I was wondering, I know that you've changed the curriculum and from the 9 ways of knowing to modes of thinking or
foundations. It's
foundations.
not as catchy.
So I was just wondering, I've seen how some of the requirements for foundations is, a class related to thinking globally or thinking locally or thinking something to do with technology.
Technologically, yeah.
And I was just wondering, other than the label, how do you think it'll shift the way students experience their classes and the way they think about their classes? Like, what do you envision as the outcome?
It's a very good question, and to be totally honest, it's not a radical change. Curricula rarely change in a truly radical or revolutionary manner. So part of it is still making sure that every student gets some exposure to the arts, some exposure to the sciences, some exposure to the humanities and the social sciences. So at its core, it's a distribution requirement. However, the 3 that you mentioned, thinking locally, thinking globally, and thinking technologically, I think are actually very exciting. Thinking globally is something that we've sort of had in place for a while, but it forces every student to take a class that really has a different international, regional perspective. That's a great thing. The other 2 are going to be more transformative. By thinking technologically, going back to the prior question, we want to make sure that every single student here gets some class, at least one class, where they have to do computer science or coding or digital humanities, so they're really getting the skills that they will need as they go out into the new economy. And just by creating that requirement, we create a demand for courses. So faculty members in, let's say, English or dance now have an incentive to create courses that integrate technology into their classes. So that's going to change in very profound ways. The thinking locally is just really cool. And it plays back into the idea that one of Barnard's most important assets is our location. And we really need to be thinking more strategically about how we use our location. One of the reasons so many students want to come here is we're in New York. And so rather than being bashful about that, we should embrace it. And so the thinking locally will really involve a series of classes that put students in New York City institutions and locations and experiences. So there's now a rapidly emerging series of classes led by Tina Camp, whom some of you may know, which are all focused in partnerships with Harlem institutions. So you can now take a class at the Studio Museum of Harlem and really understand the history of African American art. You can take a class, I won't remember all of these, but with the Dance Theater of Harlem and understand the evolution of that art form in that particular place. Anne Higonet, who many of you may know, teaches classes at the Frick and at the Metropolitan. So you can't do this in a small liberal arts college in Western Massachusetts. You can do it at Barnard, and I think it allows us to leverage our geographical strengths and put them together with our pedagogical strengths in ways that really create something that's kind of magical. Yes, over here.
Hi, I'm Eunice, and I'm delighted to be a part of the Barnard community. President Spar, my question to you is, what was your vision for Barnard when you came on board in 2008? And has that evolved over time? And how do you, as you look forward, what's an imperative for us as a community?
So In your copious spare time, if you want to go back and read my inaugural speech, I laid out 3 very clear objectives. I laid out the objective of making Barnard more international and more globally focused. I laid out the aim of creating the world's best leadership center in an undergraduate women's leadership center in an undergraduate environment, and laid out the aim of all college presidents to raise more funds to support the faculty. And I'm delighted to admit we've kind of done them all. So the college is now considerably more international than it was, both in terms of our student population. We have the visiting students now from around the world, who are an active part of the population. We have the global symposia that occurs in a different part of the world every year. So we are considerably more global. We're off to Sweden next week for an event at the ambassador's residence. Former Barnard alum and trustee Azita Raji is now the ambassador to Sweden. So we've done the international piece. The Athena Center is alive and well and kicking and thriving and expanding. Always more room to grow there, as there is in the international, but we've kind of done that. And as I said earlier, we've raised a lot of money. We've spent a lot of it on faculty research and resources, and we'll keep doing that. So what you're seeing now, as I'm in my 9th year, is less of a new overall strategy, but adding these major pieces onto it. So creating the Teaching and Learning Center is a huge part of the future. The planning for that is mostly done, so now we're really in implementation stage. I think for me, 2 of the next great goals are rethinking science, not in terms of the pedagogy. We're very good at teaching science, but celebrating science, creating better physical infrastructure around that, and diversity and inclusion. I think we've done well on those fronts, but never good enough. And always getting to that $400 million goal. All right, we probably have time for just a couple more. Yeah, over on that side of the room.
I'm Jennifer Cowan. I'm class of 1991, and I have a number of classmates who are unhappy with their experience at the college, not for activist reasons, though I'm sure that's true also, but just because they were unhappy here and it was an unpleasant experience. And some of them, I'm sure there were pleasant aspects to it, and some of them are quite financially successful and could be in a position to give to the college. And so I was wondering if you had thoughts or if there were plans on ways to reach out to alumni who may not be as enthusiastic about the college as the people in this room.
Yeah, and these, this is something we think about and worry about and fret about a fair bit. And I think, to be honest, there are some eras that are easier than others. People did have differential experiences here, and there are certain periods when we have really involved and enthusiastic classes, and certain that are a little tougher. And I think 91 fits into that moment, if you will. I think the key thing is to keep people involved, and this is the harder part of this to say. We, and I'm thinking Brett and Kat and their colleagues here, and all of you, we need a little bit of a culture change around what philanthropy means at the college. Unlike some of our peers, and I will name names here, unlike Wellesley or Vassar or Smith, and certainly unlike Harvard or Princeton, we didn't start early talking about philanthropy. I used to half joke that the Barnard bumper sticker should read, "Nice girls don't ask for money." But we didn't. We didn't ask for money for 123 years. It wasn't built into the culture. Whereas somebody mentioned Princeton earlier. Princeton, when they send you your admissions letter, they basically ask for money at the same time. And that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. My second son graduated recently from Middlebury. When we showed up for the admitted students reception, it was not staffed by faculty or administrators, it was staffed by development. And this was the admitted students reception. Barnard's never done that. We're not going to go as far as Middlebury or Princeton in the immediate future, but you all have to get more comfortable saying to people, yeah, I know you were a little bit miserable when you were 19. Most people are a little bit miserable when they go to 19. It's probably not the college's fault. Did you get a great education? Yeah. Was your life different because you went to Barnard than it would have been if you hadn't gone to Barnard? Then you probably should think hard about giving back so that the next generation can have that experience. We need to move people away from the happiness quotient. And that's hard.
And I would just add, try to get them back to the school and say, why don't you give it another chance? Barnard has so much to offer you now as an adult. You're a part of this community for your whole life. And come back and see what the school can offer you now. And in many ways, it's even richer, and they may be more open to receiving and benefiting from all that the school can offer them as adults.
They also tend to get friendlier when they have 17-year-old daughters. Just saying.
We're going to do 2 more questions. So maybe we can do one in the front right here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Janet Walkoff. I have a daughter who graduated in 2014 from Barnard. And my question has to do with the housing and dorms. What can you tell us about the thinking of the administration on how to improve the quality of the living situations?
It's a proverbial issue. We are not the Ritz-Carlton. We're not anywhere close to the Ritz-Carlton. To be totally honest, on the list of major priorities, it's probably third. At least in my mind, I think the science building has to be our first priority. We just can't keep teaching chemistry if we're worried that things are going to explode. It's not good. And then we have, and they're not even so much competing, because I think we can approach them through different channels. We have real issues around faculty housing. New York is a really expensive place to live. Columbia and NYU were both brilliant in the 70s, and they bought up a lot of what was at that point cheap real estate. I mean, this was really how NYU built itself. They bought up a lot of real estate, and then they could lure top-tier faculty by saying, as that part of the city got nicer and nicer, we're going to give you subsidized apartments. Barnard doesn't have that real estate. So we are constantly in a fight to retain our faculty, because our faculty get poached. And the first thing they say is, the University of Virginia is offering me a 5-bedroom house. What can you do? I'm like, nothing. So we really have to focus on that. The student piece, I think we can do a little bit more bit by bit. So we have some dorms that are in okay shape. We have some that are in abysmal shape. So we have an ongoing project right now of kitchen renovations. And we're just going to work on it. But I'd be lying if I told you that I see a solution anywhere in the immediate future. I will just say, I was supposed to go yesterday, and sadly I wound up with the 24-hour flu, so I couldn't go. But I'm working with the deputy mayor of New York and some of her colleagues to think about Governor's Island. I went there with her over the summer. Governor's Island has this incredible real estate. They're actually old military barracks, but these were in the days when military barracks were nice. And I just had breakfast with her this morning, and we're talking about, if you had a magic wand or $5 billion, what kind of student housing could you build on Governor's Island and bring everybody in by ferry? So we're thinking big.
All right, last question. Let's do one from this table right here. Right behind you, the mic.
Judith Westling, class of 61. On a lighter note, in San Diego, there's been, where I live, interesting reactions to your article in the New York Times. And unfortunately, people pointed to one of the commenters after the article saying, I wouldn't give to any college whose president did such and such. Now, you must know that San Diego is a center for plastic surgery. So a lot of my friends who are not Barnard students or graduates didn't care a whit. But what kind of feedback in a short couple of sentences would you like to give?
So, I'll just to step back one step. So I've written, 8 books, hundreds of articles. Nothing gets read as much as the Sunday New York Style section. Let me just put that out there. So I wrote this teeny little chapter for a friend of mine's book, and the book is called The Bitch Is Back. It's a great book. You should all go read it. And the original book was called The Bitch in the House, And it was an edited volume that came out about 15 years ago, written by women in their 30s, most of whom were complaining. You know, they got married, they hated their husbands, they didn't think babies were going to be this messy, and they, you know, they thought, so it was a great book. It made the bestseller list, and Kathy Hanauer, the editor, who's also a Barnard mom, decided to come out with the sequel called The Bitch Is Back. And so she had the women who wrote 15 years ago revisiting their lives. You know, he turned out to be a jerk. I divorced him, I turned out to be gay, I didn't know, I had kids, I didn't have kids, and they're really great stories. But she also asked, I think, 6 of us who hadn't written before to write something, and all the stories are about women in middle age. And so I gave her 17 fabulous things I'd be happy to write about. She said, no, I want you to write about women in beauty. Like, really? And she said, yeah, I think it'd be really cool if the feminist head of a women's college talked about women in beauty. So, this is the sign of a very smart editor. So I took, 2 days over Christmas break 2 years ago to write this little piece, which is not a topic I'd thought about much. But I wrote it, and it was kind of interesting, and staying true to the motto of storytelling, I was honest, and I said, I struggle with this. You know, I'm out in public, I'm on TV, I'm around 18-year-olds all the time, you know. How do you draw these lines in ways that feel true to yourself? So I put this piece out, and then my editor, doing what editors do and try and sell books, she started peddling the stories around, and the New York Times wanted mine, and the New York Times excerpted it to get the most provocative pieces, and there it goes, and it got a lot of traction. Having said all that by way of defense and venting, I do have to say the piece got more love than it got hate. At least in New York City, women in their 50s. I got a lot of, you go girl, I'm glad you said it and I didn't. I got a lot of, you're so brave. And I kept saying, I didn't mean to be brave. I was just kind of putting it out there. But I do think, and it's gotten some hate. You know, people are saying, how dare you, as the president of a women's college, talk about appearances. I'm going to refer to this as Botox Gate for the rest of my life. And I will say my past week and a half has been miserable. This has not been fun. And having the students protest my article in the style section is just, save it for the novel. But in my more, I think somebody had to say it. It might have been better if it weren't me, but I think somebody, I think these are issues that women do deal with. And my ultimate point, and I'll end on this, and this part I really do mean seriously, I think women have to stop judging each other. And so if you want to dye your hair and I don't, we should each celebrate or at least not criticize each other's choices. And I think if I can at least get that point across, did it make people angry? Yes. They'll probably get over it. So thank you all very much for your time and your work.
So thank you, Terry, and thank you, President Spar, so much for your time. So lots to talk about. But I'm going to ask for everybody's attention again in short order. I need like a bell or something. Moving along. Thank you, President Spar. I don't have a glass up here. Is it more effective if I talk to you with my outdoor voice? Sometimes that gets the room's attention. They're like, who's yelling? It is my pleasure now to introduce a fellow Leadership Assembly Committee member, Hillary Dayton Bush, who will transition us into our next speaker.